listen to me for a second, okay? Listen.
Okay.
Open your ears up. Listen.
Okay.
You say if that scenario existed, what Donald Trump was doing would be the correct thing to do. It would not be an authoritarian thing to do. It would be justified. It
Mhm.
would be prudent for him to do that, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if Donald Trump believes that is the situation and
Mhm.
he is doing the prudent thing, he's not an authoritarian. He's delusional.
Okay, so
There's a
Hitler wasn't
difference.
an authoritarian because he
Like,
actually
hey,
thought the
hey, hey,
Jews were coming
hey,
after them, right? Yes?
I'm not going to litigate World War II, whether or not Hitler was
I need
delusional, to
some
make your point.
consistency
That's like
here. I
bad
want
faith. That's
no,
bad faith
it's
as
not
fuck.
because it's not bad faith at all. You're saying that just because they believe it's happening that it's no longer authoritarian, and I'm saying that it's
I'm sorry, Sitch.
What happened?
He's making a bad faith argument. I'm not gonna
No. Wait. This is not a bad faith argument.
It is a total bad faith
No.
argument.
Hold on.
I'm not here to litigate.
No,
World
no,
War
wait,
II.
wait. So how did this? Did you contact Adam, or did Adam contact you? I don't even know how this conversation came together.
I was listening to you guys talk the other day about whether or not Trump was a fascist, and I thought, well, I've recently kind of been convinced of this, and I was, I don't know if you guys like let people jump on. I do a call-in show, so I was trying to see if I could hop on, and he's like, well, why don't you come on next week? So that's, yeah, that's how this happened.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So how is Trump a fascist? I guess. Make the case.
So I mean, generally, there's like I would say the actions that he has are things that he has a long pattern of behavior of engaging in things that I would consider fascistic, and I think that over time, at first, I thought it was just a pattern of behavior that just like kind of seemed to coincide with fascists, but
Mhm.
after a while, it seemed like a lot of the things that he would do maybe once or say maybe once, he would just keep doubling down on them or saying them over and over.
So
And now
what is a fascist first, so we can have like just a definition where this is going to line up with what Trump does?
I would say it's a nationalistic, autocratic movement led by like a single strongman, like machismo sort of person who is has a populist movement and like needs conformity under
can you
one
be
single leader.
nationalistic? Can you be nationalistic without being a fascist? Like if
Yeah, of course.
okay, so maybe that's not the. I guess you would say that that needs to be added in. I just like how is nationalistic an indicator of someone is a fascist
So
if you can be nationalistic and not be a fascist?
the idea of fascism is something that like obviously Mussolini came up with, but it's been kind of like conceptualized over time based on all the different leaders who were fascists. And so because of the patterns with each one of these people, they kind of like consists of a group of characteristics now that we would use to say one is a fascist.
Well, let's stick to the like what are the bad characteristics of fascists? Because I don't necessarily think nationalism is a bad characteristic. Like I think we should have some level of nationalism. So
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think generally people would say ultranationalism. I don't think nationalism is bad in and of itself, but when it's used in certain ways, like in a populist movement, when you're constantly having to, and in a fascist movement where you're having to constantly have like some sort of bad guy to rail against, and you're already a nationalist movement, it can be detrimental, especially to the type of government that we have, where we're like the only world power, and we're kind of working with everybody else to make sure that we stay the world power. But then when you have like a person who wants to like cut themselves off from the rest of the world and not really help other countries, not really engage with other countries, kind of cut off different types of
so now
immigration.
isolationism is fascism.
No, again, you're taking like one thing by itself and saying that thing is fascism or the whole thing is bad. Like it's
Right.
not. That's not. It's kind of a combination of all of the things together that cause the overall problem.
You understand why I'm asking though, because like if you take like 5 good things and you say we add all these 5 good things together and automatically we get this horrible thing. I'm thinking, well, why? Like, why are you throwing good things in there like nationalism? I guess you're saying like once nationalism reaches a too extreme level, then it becomes bad. Which I mean, I'm open to that argument, but what would be the level?
Well, I think one of the problems that I have when talking to a lot of people about whether or not Trump is a fascist or whether or not his movement is fascist is they deny whether or not it's fascist based on whether or not they think it's bad. When like fascism doesn't mean bad, like it has like an actual meaning to it, as an actual definition. And if you think that definition is bad, then like that's okay, good, but it doesn't mean bad. It has a stigma to it, but like you can think fascism is good. Like there's lots of people who do.
Mm-hmm. Well, is it
Okay.
something like, I guess the way that I would conceptualize it is fascism is an authoritarian movement. So like the basis, it has to be authoritarian. It has to be built around the idea that an individual person or citizen of a country is like everything in the country has to be for the sake of the country, has to be the sake of the collective. So you have authoritarian, everything's for the sake of the country, and then it's like that has a nationalistic flavor on top of that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree
Okay.
with pretty much all of that. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess kind of like to address what you were saying, Adam, it's kind of like you could have you could say like being religious is a good thing, but then you could, living in a religious theocracy is a bad thing because it's like you take something like religion, like you take nationalism, but then you overlay it onto a authoritarian government structure. So it's kind of, I guess the base is authoritarian government, and then the flavor is like, is it going to be religious? Is it going to be nationalistic? Is it going to be communist? Like how exactly the authoritarian flavor is maybe is what kind of differentiates fascism from other things.
Then why aren't we just focused on the authoritarian aspect? Because obviously nationalism plus authoritarianism is bad. Religion plus authoritarianism is bad.
Right,
Like as
right.
soon as you start stacking them up, you're like, well, it's really the authoritarianism that's bad.
Well, again, it's going to be even worse in our country because we are a liberal country. So, like, if we have people who are starting to create divides based on like racial lines or nationalistic lines, whether or not you immigrated, whether or not you're Muslim, like in our country, that is like a very big melting pot of different ethnicities and races. That would be pretty controversial and problematic to our democracy, right?
Two things. I mean, you can be black and nationalist. You can be an immigrant and still be a nationalist towards America. A lot of times the immigrants are the most nationalistic. Like they join the military, they've come here, they've chosen to be American. So you can still be nationalistic and be from elsewhere in the world. My problem, like obviously if you're devising a definition and you're using this nationalist label, you're going to get a fair amount of false positives because other people are nationalistic. You're saying, oh, look, there's the nationalist pattern. I see it. This person is a fascist.
Yeah, it's dang. Um, I think it's a lot more complicated than that because yeah, again, like it's not black people can be nationalist, but if when do you guys remember Professor Flowers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so
Who was,
like
I think, a black nationalist.
yeah, so or she said she wasn't, but she had very like black nationalistic rhetoric, and then she would say things that were very like apologetic towards things that the rest of us would consider like almost like genocidal and like a really bad thing, but she was perfectly in favor of it. The fact that she was black while saying it didn't like make it any different to me. It was just like that sort of rhetoric and that sort of idealism is going to be a problem with our country again, like especially because we are like a melting pot. So
The example is not really apt to what I'm saying though, because I'm talking about maybe an African American citizen who joins the military, is super gun ho, loves America, Team America, where the black nationalism of Professor Flowers, I think, was isolationist. She was conceptualizing the black community as its own nation within America, and that nation would be somewhat separatist towards the American national people, the
Yeah,
American.
but that is the like creating the divisions as though like you are a completely different people from everybody else that you're living with is it can be problematic in a number of ways, but it's going to be more so as a movement, of course, but even more so when you are like a leader of a country, when you're a leader of a nation, and you're supposed to be a leader of all of those people. Having any sort of divisions based on those lines is going to be even worse, right?
Would you consider yourself a nationalist?
No, I don't think that
Are you
nationalism is.
American?
Yes. I
Okay,
would say
so
that obviously I have nationalistic tendencies. I believe in like, government. I believe in military. I believe in, like taking care of Americans first. Like I believe in a lot of different things that might be considered nationalistic to an extent, but we start calling it nationalism normally once you're willing to like help that group of people to the detriment of another people. So even if it's like really hurting other people outside,
oh wow,
that's
okay.
normally
So that's
when.
okay, so that's interesting. So you're saying nationalism, it's not nationalism until you are in favor of your group to the detriment of other groups. So look, if the hypothetical African American that joins, let's say, the Air Force and becomes a pilot, and that person is not nationalistic. That person is not nationalistic because nothing they're doing is to the detriment of another society.
It's about the belief that you're willing to help your nation even if it's to the detriment of another nation. So like when we're
What if
talking
that
about.
other nation is actively trying to do things to the detriment of you? It's a self-defense situation.
Yeah, well, that's which is why I say that I believe in military. But if we're talking about like whether or not refugees should be able to come into the country or whether or not we should accept asylum seekers, these are things that we would consider to be nationalistic because at this point we're even like doing it to the detriment of other people because they're not part of our nation.
hmm Okay,
So when you
interesting.
say at the so well, let's just for the sake of the conversation, we'll say like there's positive nationalism and then there's negative nationalism. And negative nationalism is this concept of supporting your nation's interests at the detriment of other nations or other people from other nations. Is in your kind of way of you're conceptualizing this, is this only in ways that are unjustified when you say like the detriment of other nations?
Well, with like a liberal sort of ideology, you would just generally believe that it's going to be unjustified. Like what without the to the detriment of others, it's kind of just patriotism at that
Hmm.
point. And
Right.
so yeah, like if without the part where it's like to the detriment. So if you ever, I talk to Groypers a lot, and a lot of times they'll say like, Tom, you say that you're in favor of Americans first, but you're not really. And I'll say like, why not? And then they'll say like, because you're willing to give money to Israel or Ukraine. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that I don't want to take care of Americans first. It just means that there's also a second, a third, and a fourth after us, and there's other people that come after. But for them, there is nobody that comes after. That would be
Hmm.
nationalism.
Could we draw the line at imperialism, where, like, obviously we don't like what's going on with Russia invading Ukraine because it's imperialistic.
Well, I mean, if you ever heard Candace Owens talk about this, she'll tell you that imperialists aren't real nationalists because if they were real nationalists, they never would have gone outside of their country in the first
Well,
place and
look,
started invading
I'm asking
others.
you.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm just,
asking you.
I don't, I don't,
You're the one drawing the line at a detriment to others. Obviously, I would classify imperialism as a detriment to others.
I would say that yes, imperialism is to the detriment of others. When you're saying draw the line there, I don't know if you're saying that they would have to be imperialist in order to be a nationalist. I'm kind of just using like the general like
Well,
Google
I'm using your
dictionary
definition of doing
definition.
harm. I'm using your definition of doing harm to others because obviously imperialism would do harm to others. I think that's the Ukraine conflict is a perfect example. Russia wants to take all of Ukraine's land
Mhm.
and make their people Russian.
Yeah,
That's imperialism
yeah. So I
101,
would
right?
say that part is definitely nationalistic, where they
But if
believe that their way
asylum
of life is so
seekers
much better that they are
but if
willing to just
asylum
take over
seekers
others.
come to the border and we turn them away, that's not imperialistic.
Correct. That would not be imperialistic.
Right. So that's why I'm making the distinction. So you would say turning, by your definition, you would say turning people away at the border is nationalistic. and at the detriment to others. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to define the levels here. So I would not define turning away asylum seekers as nationalism.
I mean, I don't think it is in and of itself. I think it's a nationalistic idea, just as like as I said, like having a military is like a nationalistic idea because obviously, like anytime we use our military, it's generally going unless we're using it on our own citizens, it's going to be to the detriment of another nation, right?
Well, no, it could be fully self-defense, obviously.
Right, but it's still to the detriment of another. It's just that yes, I believe that that's like
It would
okay
not
when
be
it's
in the detriment to
it
another if it was self-defense. Unless you're saying self-defense is not acceptable.
well, detriment doesn't mean that it's what detriment has nothing to do with whether or not it's acceptable, right? Like when Kyle Rittenhouse shoots somebody in the head, it's still to the detriment of their head, regardless of whether or not he was justified in doing it, right?
Yeah, justified.
I mean, I would
What?
include justification as part of the equation, but anyway. So so we got nationalist and authoritarian. What else was there for
Uh,
fascist?
I mean, it's like a autocracy under a single leader. Like where Sitch was saying earlier, it would have to include like some sort of um, authoritarianism that would generally come under an autocracy as well. But yeah, like a single dictator that has a populist type movement that is nationalistic is generally the way that people look at fascism or the way that they define it.
Right.
And then it comes with a bunch of like common characteristics, right? Like military supremacy, always being the victim. Like Mussolini's idea had this like great myth that you had to use in order to bring people together. Because the idea of fascism was supposed to be in contrast to liberalism. And the fact that like they felt like liberalism allowing people to vote and everything doesn't account for the fact that humans are just very emotional and they aren't very logical. And so allowing everybody to vote can never really work. And so instead, you take advantage of their emotional tendencies and try to get them to buy into a single leader. And then that leader should just be a good leader on behalf of all of them.
Well, I mean, there's obviously some overlap with the democratic system, right? Obviously, in a democracy, you're trying to get voters to support you so that you can gain public office. So, but that you wouldn't call that fascism, right?
Right. Well, yeah, of course not. Again, I mean, taking one like aspect or one tendency and then calling that thing in and of itself fascism just doesn't really it doesn't really work the same because yeah, it's going to be the entirety of it as a
Well, look,
totality.
as someone who is um, continually pro democracy, like I'm very enthusiastic about democracy. Often to like I'm often against our chat because they would like to limit people's ability to vote sometimes, and I'm more about expanding the vote than anything. This is what I'm saying about you're taking a bunch of things that I would categorize as good things, like popular support, people voting. That I
Well,
would say that's a
when I say
good thing, and
popular,
you're
I didn't
saying,
say
look,
pop.
that's a bad thing. Popular support is part of being a fascist.
No, no, no,
Nationalism is being a part of being a fascist. It's
no, no,
like,
no. I said populist, not
okay.
popular support.
Well,
Yeah, being a
what is the difference between a populist and popular support?
so a populism is also a type of movement that's also going to be based on
I,
like the people against the elites or the establishment. It's also based on like you're being oppressed. The country isn't where it should be. The you have to have like yes a bunch of different types of like victimhoods and victim mentalities that you have to be fighting, and you're the only one who's willing to recognize all of these injustices. So because you're the only one who's willing to recognize it, you have to get voted in order for it to be stopped. Like these are
so look, the populist movement basically rose out of a movement to move from the gold standard to the silver standard, right? A lot of these farmers felt like they were being oppressed by rich bankers, okay? Doesn't it matter if they're actually being um, used? What if they're actually being victims? Like, doesn't that play into the equation?
It does, but you wouldn't be like generally your entire like movement isn't going to be based off of that. So like right now, Kamala Harris is saying that the big corporations are overcharging everybody, and she's going to come in and put price capping on these corporations to make it to where Americans can pay for their stuff.
Yeah,
It's
great
not.
example. She's saying that people are being victimized by the greedy grocery corporations.
Yes. So she doesn't say that they're the bad guys, and she doesn't say that they're doing these horrible things and I need to come stop them. It's more so I want to benefit Americans. I want to make sure that they can buy everyday household items, and so I just want to improve this. There's a big difference between like saying, because this is also like a part of like fascistic tendencies, is saying over and over that like your country isn't where it should be, it's failing, it's not going to make it, and you have to do something drastic in order to fix these things. And so this, to say you're failing versus you would like to improve something, those are drastically different. Most politicians don't say we're failing, but Donald Trump does say we're failing and says that he needs to come and fix everything.
I
You
mean,
don't think
the
rhetoric,
what? Go ahead, Vanessa. You say something.
you don't think her rhetoric is a bit evocative of the same sentiments as Trump's? It's just Trump's is just a bit more um ob- uh, overt with it.
Well, when you say overt, I would call it demonizing. And I think that, yes, the demonization of another group in order to get what you want done is totally different. So I think that, like, I can look at elites and say that we should
I
tax them at higher rates, and that we should, maybe use that money to better homeless people or poor people, without saying the elites are these greedy pieces of shit that are taking all your money and they're being unfair and they don't, there shouldn't be billionaires and eat the rich and all of that crap. Like that would be very different.
or was it Trump saying that? What
No,
were the
no, that's not an example of Trump. That's leftists more so do that. Communists do that, but they're also going to be populists generally.
You're saying that Kamala Harris is not demonizing people.
Not that she's not demonizing people, that in order for her to say that she wants to put caps on corporations, she's not demonizing the corporation, from what I've heard at least.
Right, but like you're making the argument that Trump is saying the nation is going to fail when you have Kamala Harris saying if you elect Trump, it's the end of democracy. How is that not a nation failure?
Um,
Like you're literally coming on here to tell us that Trump is a fascist. How are you not saying that the nation is going to fail if Trump is elected?
I think that he is a danger to democracy. I think obviously in his last term he was a danger to democracy. He attempted a coup. January 6th happened. There was a lot that was going on, but we ended up having enough like checks and balances in place, and that was like one of the things that I thought was great about the Trump project, is that it proved how great our checks and balances are, but
Well,
that
no,
doesn't
the
mean that
question
they'll
is really
always
about
hold up.
the question is about demonization. You're saying fascists participate in demonizing people. You're literally here to say that Trump is a fascist, and Kamala Harris, a main part of her campaign is if Trump is elected, it's an end to democracy. Like, how is that not fascistic?
Well, again, so the demonization part was part of the populist part. Populism is one aspect of all of the things that go into fascism.
So you have
So
to have all of the things here. This
not
this is
no
why
no
this
not all of them, but again, not one of them either. You wouldn't just take one thing and say anytime someone demonizes another person, this is populism. Like that doesn't equate, right?
well, no, this is my problem with the five things is because you're first of all, there's two things that I don't think are bad things. Obviously, popular support for programs I think is good. That's democracy. That's literally how our system functions. I don't think nationalism is bad. I think imperialism is bad, but um, like you're using a much wider definition of nationalism. So if you're going to
Wait,
lump a bunch of things in that are good and all of a sudden that adds up to something bad, fascism, I think we should just separate the one thing, the indispensable element that makes it fascism. I
Do you
would say
think
that that
do you
is
think
authoritarianism.
authoritarianism is good, Adam?
No, obviously not.
Okay,
But
do you think a dictatorship is good? What
no,
about an autocracy?
no. But those are all the same thing. You
Well,
just listed
no,
all
no,
one
no.
thing.
They're not. They're not the same thing. They can be different aspects of an autocracy, but they're not all the same exact
What is
thing.
how are you defining an autocracy?
An autocracy is a centralized government that's generally going to have a dictator through
Right. Okay.
authoritarian rule.
So we've already covered two of them. You said dictatorship.
Correct.
So dictatorship and autocracy are the same thing. What is authoritarian?
Authoritarian is going to be somebody who is a dictator, but yes, they're doing
So look,
everything.
we covered all the bases. It's one thing. It's autocracy. It's authoritarianism. It's dictatorship. It's all the one same thing, right? It's I am the state. It's the law is whatever I say.
Well, and then so you don't think any of those things are good. Then you keep saying popular support. I'm not saying popular support. I'm saying populist. And so I don't
think that one thing. I don't think that one thing is good. Like we argue against authoritarianism. We argue against autocracy. We argue against that constantly. I would say the world is basically split up into liberal democracies where people gain power by popular support. You would call that populism. Suddenly it's a bad thing.
I wouldn't, again, you keep saying that. I do not think popular support is populism. They are totally different things. Populism is, again, it's about the people versus the elites and the establishment. It's about destroying the upper echelons of people who are supposedly oppressing everybody else. Populism is not having popular support. Populism is...
You're defining populism as like dragging elites out in the street and murdering them? Is that how you're defining populism?
No, again, it's generally going to be through like the demonization of the elites or the establishment, and then saying that like they're all oppressing all of the
millionaires
people
and billionaires.
Yeah, so like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are like pretty much the two populists of the last like couple decades. That's it. Everybody else who had popular support, they were not all populists. And you say that like I'm using weird definitions. All of these are like Google definitions. These are the definitions that you'll get from like any dictionary.
I've read books on populism. I'm interested in populism, so I know where the populism movement began. It began as a progressive movement. So it's interesting that everyone hates populism now. But I mean, I would conceptually, populism and democracy, I just see as the same. The conceptually, I see dictatorship, autocracy, and authoritarianism as the same. So I think those.
Well, I don't think populism is always bad either, though. Like even like the American Revolution could be considered like a populist type of movement because they were going against the king, right? But like I would look at that as justified. I don't look at it as like demonizing billionaires as justified. I don't look at like saying the establishment within government is all like dirty and corrupt, and that they're all trying to take your money, and that they don't actually vote on your behalf, but they're just actually there just to make billions of dollars. Like I don't think that's good. And so again, like what I was saying, populism is bad. Not really. It's just how it's being used and whether or not the way you're using it is justified. And currently, I don't think that it would be a justified movement.
Right. Is Trump demonizing billionaires? I mean, I see more demonization of billionaires on the...
No, you demonize the establishment.
On the left, obviously. So, but yeah okay. So, I guess let's move on to how you think Donald Trump is an authoritarian.
I mean, dang, the way that he talks about doing different things. So he's obviously, I would say that like attempting a coup is authoritarianistic. Now, I want to be clear. Obviously, again, within our government, within our checks and balances, you can't actually rule as an authoritarian, but you can make attempts after attempts over and over. And I think that, yes, just somebody having authoritarian tendencies is going to be a negative for me as somebody who, yes, is very, very much believes in liberal principles. But yeah, I think like the trying to use the DOJ to go after his enemies and like go after like political enemies, go after personal enemies and try to get them in trouble. I would say like his praise of other like dictators like Putin, Hitler, Viktor Orban, Kim Jong-un shows that like he probably has an affinity for dictatorships. Let's see.
Well, I mean, what is? Can you? I'm very much in favor of like something that I can like it's unquestionable, some sort of tangible evidence that I can point to that is like some sort of authoritarian move. Like if Donald Trump started jailing people without even there being any pretense of law, I think obviously we're like way into the authoritarian camp. So
Well, I
just
mean, also like in the United States, we would generally consider like like because when I'm using like him trying to use the DOJ to go after like personal enemies and things like that, this is something that we would consider against our like personal liberties, our freedoms, freedom of speech. Like him saying that like we should expand libel laws to sue journalists for saying things like he is trying to use the government to enforce his will and just go after people for personal reasons. All of a sudden, the government is now his personal shield and personal sword that he can use against anybody at will. And so,
well,
like
the question
outside
though
of
is if he's operating within the law, then he's not an authoritarian. Obviously, authoritarian is I am above the law. I make the law.
right, that's what I'm saying is that when he's trying to do these things over and over, he is operating outside of the law. He's attempting to operate outside of the law. Obviously, January 6th would be another one where he is trying to use his people and use his power, use all of the loyalists that he's brought in to try to overthrow the government and overthrow the election. Like, there's a bunch of yes, there's tons and tons of examples of him just seeming to have like a lack of care for the Constitution, for people's personal freedoms, and then yes, trying over and over to, just swing around his weight and his power to get things done, even if it's outside of our
What's examples?
Constitution.
Tons and tons of examples. Can you like give us a couple?
Of which one? I mean, I said I have tons of examples of him being like a fascist. I just gave a bunch of examples of him being authoritarian. Is there something else? But
No, the one.
What were the examples?
Yeah.
the examples of the authoritarianism. So again,
Yeah.
using
Look,
the DOJ over and over. The
Look,
affinity.
maybe attempting to use the DOJ, but he kept getting stopped. Like obviously, the law is standing in the way. That I would say, like an authoritarian is someone who is above the law. So if he
It's
keeps making attempts and the law keeps stopping him, I don't know how you can make the argument that he's an authoritarian.
yeah. So we can have a liberal government or we can have a liberal philosophy. Two different things, right? You can have a fascistic government or you can have a fascistic philosophy. I would say Trump has a fascist philosophy. He is a fascist. We cannot have a fascist government unless he gets enough loyalists in to do something, to do a bunch of things that are drastic. But yes, like we're talking about the philosophy, we're talking about his tendencies, we're talking about the characteristics of Donald Trump and the fact that these all align with what it is that we would call fascist.
And what is the look? Obviously, I'm completely guilty of speeding. Like speed laws are a guideline for me, right? You wouldn't call me a fascist because I am against the law. I'm constantly breaking the law, right?
Correct.
It would have to be some sort of characteristic.
Overriding someone's like personal freedoms, their rights, their things like that.
Right. Okay. So he would have to break the law in a way that actually harmed other people. That's where you're drawing the distinction.
I mean, even if it doesn't have some sort of direct harm on somebody, I don't know that I would actually like say that it doesn't like I guess in general, yes,
so
like because even
so
challenging
so I
because
could be a
even
fascist
challenging
just 'cause I
somebody's
speed, right?
No, again, you're not like really like challenging other people's freedoms, and you're not like doing that in authoritative position. You're not in a like a role as a leader when you're
then you
doing
do
this and
agree
forcing
with
this upon others.
look. So you do agree with the line. As long as he's not harming other people, then that's where the line is. As soon as he circumvents the law to harm other people, or just wants to
Yeah,
circumvent
all
the
I said is
law
that I don't
to
know that
harm
it would
other
have to
people.
have some sort. Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. That's what I was saying is that I don't think that you would have to have some sort of direct harm on somebody else to where it could be
Mhm.
like, yes, more of a systemic harm. But yeah.
Okay. Sitch, you have any questions or anything? Sitch is taking a nap.
I'm taking a nap. Now, I mean, I think you have to separate, like, obviously, a person could be trying to enact authoritarian or fascistic policies, and whether or not they are able to manifest them or not has no bearing on defining them as an authoritarian or a fascist, right? That's the definition of the government structure, not the individual. So if Trump
Well,
is attempting to do something that you would classify as authoritarian, if he fails to do it, that doesn't mean that he's not authoritarian. Would you agree with that, Adam?
Yeah, he's defining him as an authoritarian.
well,
Look,
he
there are a lot of people who are authoritarians that are obviously being constrained by the political and economic system
Right, right,
around
right,
them.
right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So, I mean, I would, you can look at various works. One that we talk about all the time is the book The Authoritarian Dynamic, where she postulates that a third of people are actually authoritarians, right? And usually they're pretty mellow until things start going off the wheels start coming off of society, and then all of a sudden they become very authoritarian. So,
Mm-hmm. So is the only contention now, like, or is the main contention now, if Donald Trump is authoritarian? Is that the main contention that is taking place in this section of the conversation?
Adam.
Adam, is that
well,
the main contention? Is Trump authoritarian?
if you want to, I don't know that I have enough information to really be confident that Donald Trump is an authoritarian.
Well, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
so when I'm giving these examples, right? You guys asked for examples a couple of times, and I gave a couple. So, like, a dictatorialism would be like an authoritarian thing. When I use like when I say that we have dozens of examples of him trying to use the DOJ and use the government to go after people for personal reasons and for political reasons. Like, that is just authoritarian. Yes, we can all agree on that. That is just an authoritarian thing to do, regardless of whether or not you get away with it. We would still say that is an authoritarian action. Yes.
Obviously, it depends upon what action he's pursuing. Like, if he is pursuing legitimate corruption, then like that's
So when Omarosa makes fun of him for, I think it was like, I forget, having little fingers or something, and he wanted to use the DOJ to go after her to shut her
I'm
up.
not
There's a
I'm not familiar with this example. So, but obviously that would be
Well, before we get into example, so if Donald Trump is just trying to like hone in on definition here, if Donald Trump or any president is using the DOJ to go after people wrongly, is that meet the criteria of being authoritarian, or is that just a check mark that puts them in that direction? Adam.
I mean, it would obviously the person could be incorrect, and if they're
Mhm.
pursuing the person for legitimate reasons, but they're wrong, a lot of people are going to say, well, they're
Right. Well,
authoritarian, they're just doing it for their own
let's say just
selfish reasons. But
right.
yeah,
But
like
okay.
I would put it as a check, obviously.
Okay.
My
So
my my
yeah.
really, I'm defining it as someone who sees himself above the law. And when I look
Right.
at Donald Trump, I see someone who comes from a business type environment where he's used to wheeling and dealing to get things out of people. He doesn't, it's not like a gun to the head situation. When you're thinking of authoritarian dictators, you're thinking of like Saddam Hussein, who is like marches 30 people out of a room and murders them all to kind of whip people into shape, right?
Yes, but what, like, it's the same again when we're talking about like overthrowing people's personal freedoms, like Donald Trump talking about the enemy within, talking about using the military against them, saying that he was going to use the military against BLM. Like, these are all things that we would consider to be him, like, trying to push back on people's, like, personal liberties or even states' rights as well. And then, like, I went to two different
you're
rallies.
Comparing those actions to Saddam Hussein, like literally
no, again, we're
murdering
talking
people in front of his political rivals.
No, it doesn't have to be the worst type of, like, injustice in order for it to be an injustice to people's rights. Like, it doesn't have to be the worst possible thing in the world. Just because they're both authoritarians doesn't mean that they're both just as bad as one another, right?
Well, obviously, there's a distinction to be made here that you pointed out. We're talking about people who have like an authoritarian personality. They would like to do the nastiest possible things to people. And then there are people who are actually authoritarians who have the power to do these things and act on them and use that power to do those kinds of things. Like you're talking about Donald Trump just being an authoritarian personality where he would like to do these things, but the state keeps standing in the way. The law keeps preventing him from doing the things that he wants to do.
Yeah, the Constitution, yeah.
Right. Well, look, I think 30% of the population are authoritarians that would like to do things that the law keeps standing in the way of them doing. So,
well, I mean, yeah, like Biden has twice written executive orders that stop anybody who crosses the border illegally from claiming asylum, right? This is likely going to get overturned by the Supreme Court, as it did the first time. It'll get overturned again this time.
So Biden is an authoritarian too,
right? But I wouldn't call that authoritarian because this is this isn't against.
It's not Trump.
Well, I'm saying that because it's something that we would consider against federal law or against the Constitution, that we wouldn't say that this is like a authoritarian just because of that in and of itself, because we wouldn't call those like their rights to have that. Though I do think that it would be something that we would consider nationalistic. It is a type of nationalistic tendency for sure.
If Trump did that exact same thing, would you call that fascistic?
No. Again, it's not. It's never going to be just one thing. Like, Trump has been around for 8 years now. I told you in DMs, like, I just started believing that he was fascist. I've never called anybody fascist. I'm not a fucking leftist. Like, I hate the way that they use words like racist and Nazi and fascist and all this shit. So I've never called anybody a fascist before. But he is just like, he's gotten to the point where I feel like he's overboard. And then not only that, but you guys, when I was listening to you, were going over the fact that, like, even 13 White House staffers had come out at this point saying that they felt like he was fascist, and they're among a large group already that's already said these sorts of things that worked with him beforehand. So there's a lot of them.
I would bet at least 50% of those people are as well fascists by your definition, or authoritarians by your definition. So,
well, let me ask you something, Adam. Do you think, because you're kind of making this distinction between like the fascist personality type versus whatever is specifically a fascist, do you think that Donald Trump has the authoritarian? Do you think that Donald Trump has an authoritarian personality type?
I don't know. I don't have enough information to know that. I mean, I've read a bunch of these insider books, and it's unclear.
Well, I mean, so if I give you like a bunch of, sorry, go ahead.
Do you consider the act of, the elector scheme, like, that's a check mark in the authoritarian box, right?
I mean, he's going to conceptualize it as feeling out the law. Like, he even now believes that it was a legal loophole that he was exploiting. Is that authoritarianism? I think of authoritarianism as me saying, like, I don't care what the law is. I'm going to do whatever I want. Like, he's conceptualizing it as, there's this legal loophole, I'm going to exploit it. If that legal loophole wasn't there, would January of 6 had happened? I'm not sure that it would. Like, if he didn't have an attorney that came to him and provided him with this legal loophole, what would he have done?
Yes, but even without that, is that just trying to get the electors to take away people's votes from all 7 of those states in the first place is already something that is, like, definitely authoritarian, right? just trying
No,
to
it's
get
delusional.
how. But he's actually like getting people to pretend that he won in 7 different states. Like this
He
is
believes he
authoritarian.
won. He
I don't-
believes he won. That's delusional. That's not authoritarian.
Okay.
Well,
I
wait a
think
minute,
that all authoritarians think they're doing something right for some sort of
Look,
reason. Like
delusion
even
is
Hitler
rampant.
thought he was genociding Jews for a good reason. Like I don't think it made any difference as to whether or not it was authoritarian when he did it.
right. Do you think that like
It does look. It literally does make a difference if he actually won the election, right? You're only saying like
Yes, but he didn't. Do you believe he won the election?
no, I don't.
Okay, so then you think it's authoritarian.
I literally said he's delusional.
Yes,
I
but
don't know how
you're
you
saying
can't understand
delusional
the
as though that's
distinction
a
between the two.
dichotomy. No, there's not a distinction. You can be delusional and an authoritarian. There's not a distinction. You can be both. Most authoritarians are delusional. Mao, Hitler, all of these people, they are delusional to some extent, or they're just purposefully lying. But
If the 2020 election was legitimately stolen, the Democrats were stuffing ballot boxes all over the place. Okay, they took 2 million votes from Donald Trump and they burned them in a fucking tire fire. Okay,
Mhm.
and Donald Trump has undeniable evidence of this, but and he
I would have been in the
goes
Capitol with the
and
rest
then
of
he
them.
goes after them. Okay, so look,
Mhm.
you agree with me then? If
No,
that's
I
the
don't, because he didn't have that
Hey,
undeniable
hey,
evidence, Adam. He didn't have
li-
that.
listen to me for a second, okay? Listen.
Okay.
Open your ears up. Listen.
Okay.
You say if that scenario existed, what Donald Trump was doing would be the correct thing to do. It would not be an authoritarian thing to do. It would be justified. It
Mhm.
would be prudent for him to do that, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if Donald Trump believes that is the situation and
Mhm.
he is doing the prudent thing, he's not an authoritarian. He's delusional.
Okay, so
There's a
Hitler
difference.
wasn't an authoritarian because he actually
Hey,
thought the
hey,
Jews
hey,
were coming
hey.
after them, right? Yes?
I'm not going to litigate World War II, whether or not Hitler was
I need
delusional to
some
make your point.
consistency
That's
here.
like
I
bad
want
faith. That's
no,
bad faith
it's
as
not,
fuck.
because it's not bad faith at all. You're saying that just because they believe it's happening that it's no longer authoritarian, and I'm saying that so if Hitler thinks that the Jews are actually coming after them, then that's not an authoritarian thing,
what
right?
happened?
He's making a bad faith argument. I'm not going to let him do it.
Wait. This is not a bad faith argument.
It is a
Okay.
total bad faith
No.
argument.
Hold on.
I'm not here to litigate World War II.
Wait. Okay. This is what you do have to litigate, right? You're basically making the argument that delusion is a defense against everything in terms of negative intention or being labeled as an authoritarian. That is the argument that you're making.
It's
So-
not.
Well, okay, so you agree that someone
You agree that there's
be-
a difference between someone who's delusional and someone who's authoritarian, right? This person could be the nicest person in the world. If
Wait,
they're
wait, wait.
delusional and acting on a delusion, they're not an authoritarian. They're doing the
Hold
right
on.
thing. You literally agree with what he said.
Hold on. Are you saying that someone who suffers from a delusion cannot be authoritarian? Because that's what you're saying.
No, I am not.
So give me an example of someone who is delusional and authoritarian by your definitions of these words.
I don't. That's not my argument.
That is your that's the question, is that you're saying Donald Trump is not authoritarian because he's delusional.
Someone who is an authoritarian
Mm-hmm.
is acting imprudently. They know that they're acting imprudently. They know that they lost the election and they don't give a fuck. They're like, fuck the system, fuck the rules. It doesn't matter. I'm an authoritarian. I am the law. I am the state. That's an authoritarian. Do you agree?
So I don't agree. No. Authoritarian is just someone who doesn't have respect for the laws, the Constitution, and was willing to sacrifice all those things in favor of what they want or believe.
Okay,
is
then
the correct
we're
thing for
using
society.
completely different definitions of authoritarian.
Yeah, but so again, as I asked you, under your definition, you are saying that someone cannot be delusional and authoritarian.
Someone can be delusional and authoritarian, obviously.
Okay,
Obviously.
so give me an example. So what does that look like?
Saddam Hussein
Right.
mistakenly executes 50 of the wrong people because he thinks they're conspiring against him because he's delusional.
Why is that authoritarian?
Because he is the law. He can do whatever he wants.
No, but so like what part of that? So the authoritarian part is the executing the people without trial? Is that the authoritarian part? I'm trying to ask you. I'm trying to figure out this distinction here.
Look, I'm done with this, okay?
Okay.
I'm literally done with you.
Okay. So now what?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understood, I thought you were saying that, yeah, if it was a delusion, that was the argument against whether or not it was authoritarian. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean,
Well,
I was gonna say I have like the examples that I have generally are that like Trump always has a need for a bunch of enemies, whether it's like rhinos, the swamp, immigrants, the establishment, the deep state, the media, that he like kind of takes all of the checks and balances that would be on him for society. So like things like media, that he like demonizes the media so that they're always wrong and they're always lying before they ever say that he's lying, that he'll say, Democrats and the establishment are all liars so that he can discredit them before they ever come against him. That same thing with the science.
When it comes to reporting on Trump, though,
Say that again.
I think the media takes a lot of liberty when it comes to honestly reporting on Trump.
Maybe I don't see much of it. What
So
like what?
that you've listed it as an example. I would assume you would believe that everything that the media is reporting on Trump is that they're in factual, and that he's just using that as a way to martyr himself or to victimize himself in his quest to fascistic
Yeah,
pursuit.
it generally, I think that like there's a mix up when it comes to media where like if there's somebody doing journalism, yes, they have like journalistic ethics and standards that they have to abide by and that they have to have like all these accuracies, right? But when we turn to like opinion pieces with somebody like Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, like these are people who are just giving their opinions on things and they're taking what journalists get, they're taking that information and then they're giving you their thoughts on it, right? That's obviously much more like editorialized than a journalist is. When it comes to journalism and those people, I would say that those people are fairly accurate.
I'm aware of the difference between journalism and punditry. I'm talking about specific journalists because I work in media sometimes, so I'm aware. So I'm asking specifically. You don't think that there are times where media is?
Yeah, I don't think journalists are like are maliciously like saying things incorrectly. I think that generally if they get things wrong and they're able to be shown that it's wrong, that they'll retract those things.
Okay. Well, I mean, you would assume, you'd agree that a lot of journalists are ideologically biased in one direction and are going to...
Yeah, of course. So what information they share, is obviously going to be...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess regarding to the whole conversation overall in terms of the Trump fascist thing, the way that I look at it is I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump has authoritarian tendencies. And what I mean by that is I think this does come a lot from like the CEO mentality. He doesn't really have a respect for laws, rules, regulations. He sort of goes into being the president as like being the CEO of a company where he can just kind of tell everyone what to do and everyone's supposed to do it. And he's not really, doesn't have respect or care for any of these, preset institutions or structures that are supposed to protect individual rights or the country or anything of that nature. I don't think he really cares about any of that. I think he just thinks in his mind, what I want to do is the correct thing and I want to materialize that. And to me, that is an authoritarian mindset. So I would say that I think that's fair. Where I don't think it makes sense to call him fascist, even though I do believe that his rhetoric is nationalistic, he definitely is a populist movement, is that to me, like specifically fascism is this concept, by Mussolini, by the Italians, and then even by the Nazis, sort of evolved it, is the concept that you as the individual are supposed to sort of sacrifice your individuality for the collective of the state. Everything is supposed to be of the state. There's nothing outside the state. And obviously that element, which I think is a key element of fascism, none of that is present in the Donald Trump campaign or the MAGA movement or anything like that.
I think that I totally agree with everything you're saying. But the difference is that if we're talking about a fascistic philosophy while you're fighting against the establishment and the establishment is currently the government, then obviously you wouldn't want people to kowtow to the state, but instead to you and your movement until the state is you and your loyalists. And so if it was Donald Trump and his loyalists, then yes, I think that like the cult-like movement, the way that it already is, the fact that like people seem to deny, he'll say like, I want a Muslim ban, and then right afterwards everybody denies whether or not he ever said he wanted a Muslim ban, like, or he says, the immigrants coming into the country are are murderers and rapists, and then they all deny whether or not he called them murderers and rapists. Like, yeah, I think that these people are all willing to just like deny anything bad that he ever says in favor of Trump, and that he already has that type of movement, and that yes, if it was him and his loyalists in charge, he would already have a movement that is going to kind of give everything to them anyways.
I mean, I do think that Trump has he cultivates a cult mentality because of the attack on institutions. Basically creates a situation where you can't trust information that comes from any other source. So I mean, it's, I always bring up the Bill Barr example. Bill Barr is seen as like a complete loyalist, but the second he turns against Trump in the election claims about that they couldn't find any fraudulent election claims, suddenly like everyone turns on him because Trump turns on him. So it's like Trump's sort of dictation turns the movement against him, and it seems like it's very difficult, if not impossible, to find truth or fact claims outside of Trump's positions. I think the only one that I can think of, though this is a big one, the only one I can think of is a lot of the COVID stuff. A lot of people did turn against Trump regarding the vaccine, regarding COVID lockdowns, regarding not firing Fauci and everything to that nature. So even though I understand what you're saying, I don't think it's gotten to the I think with fascism, there was sort of an underlying intuition where people had this anti-individualistic desire to be part of this collectivist movement of the state. I don't perceive that as being an underlying intuition in the MAGA movement or the Trump movement, is that people are following Trump because they want to shed their individuality to be part of like the collective state under Donald Trump. I think it's more just motivated by the fact that people think they live in a society that the elites and institutions are all completely corrupt by wokeness, by greed, by other things, and they view Trump sort of as a figure who will come and demolish all those things. And to me, that's a key difference here.
If Trump had succeeded at stealing the election on January 6th, do you not? From everything that I see, they all downplay what happened on January 6th, or they just deny that it was like an insurrection at all, or that there was a coup whatsoever. Do you not think that they all just would have like either have downplayed it or just been completely behind it the entire way? Like, because, yeah, like, do you not think that that's what they all would have done?
Well, when you say they all, who are
Trump again, like Trump loyalists, voters? MAGA people who we would consider MAGA movement. So yeah, politicians, voters, like people who we would consider America First MAGA voters.
Yeah, I think a good chunk of politicians and MAGA supporters would have gone along with it. Like 80% or so would have gone along with him stealing the election outright, assuming he got away with it. Like the Supreme Court, signed off on it or something.
I would say like 80% of Republicans overall. I would say that that's like, those are the 80% are the like MAGA loyalists. And that at that point, yes, like those people are the ones. So I don't think that Hitler's Nazi movement wanted anybody to be loyal to the state until it was his state, until it was a Nazi government. Then they wanted everybody to be loyal to the state. And so I think it would be the same with Trump, is that as he replaces everybody in the Republican Party, gets all the rhinos out of the way and then replaces them all with MAGA loyalists at that point, I think that he would want them to be loyal to those people. And into his movement, and I would say that yes, like if they
Well,
have the state,
mhm.
then he would want them to be loyal to the state.
No, but
And
my position, what I'm saying, the distinction here, and I know a lot of people on the left who want to call him fascist. What they just mean is they just mean authoritarian and racist. That's really what they mean, and they're kind of tired of calling him Nazi. But when I hear fascist, I'm actually trying to use like the actual definition to my understanding of what it means. And my understanding is that fascism is an anti-individualist collectivist movement, and that the guiding or one of the guiding moral intuitions for the people involved in it is to shed their individualism for collectivism. And as I said, I don't see that, in my opinion, I don't see that manifesting in the Trump movement. Even if people went along with the election, Donald Trump stealing the election, my assumption would be they're going along with it because they'll buy into the fact that, oh, it has been stolen. It's not really based on this idea of I'm too individualistic. I want to be part of this collective. I want to be part of this collectivism of the state or collectivism of the MAGA movement.
so I went to 2 Trump rallies over the last week. And at the last one, I live in Georgia. I went to the one in Atlanta at Georgia Tech, and then the one at Duluth. And at the one at Georgia Tech, everybody started chanting while Donald Trump was speaking, "Lock her up," while he was talking about Kamala Harris. Nobody even has a claim of a crime that she's committed whatsoever. It maybe made a little bit more sense with like Hillary because of like the email situation, but with Kamala, there was no like reason to say lock her up. Yet we have them chanting lock her up. We have people who are like MAGA leaders saying things like we should lock up all the Democrats and shit like that. I would say that these are people who are collectivists and who are willing to give away individual rights for the collective. I would say that these, in large part, these are people who are 100% willing to give all of that up. And I would say that, yeah, that is just what the movement is, that they're all willing to give up logic and reason and all of these things just for the glory of Donald Trump to continue looking like a hero.
Well, the reason I would disagree is because, and against what I say, I think it's fair to say that, Donald Trump is authoritarian, has these authoritarian tendencies. Like if you were to ask the average Trump supporter, say like, do you support an individual's right to have free speech and to criticize the government? I'm assuming that they would say yes. If you ask them, do you think that individuals should have a right to religion? Should they have a right to bear arms from the government? Should they have a right to, fair trial? Like if you ask them about all these individual rights that are sort of enshrined in American culture, even if they're going to be hypocritical when it comes to Kamala Harris or something, they're still operating from a philosophy where they believe that those individual rights are important. Now, I'm not a historian, so I don't know what it was like in Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, but my understanding is that the average people that were supporting this movement, they didn't agree with those like individual rights on a philosophical level the way you would get from most Americans.
From what I understood is that it was that they were saying, like the Nazi movement was saying that like that Hitler was the one who ought to be in power, that's who the people actually wanted, but the state wasn't allowing them. When he attempted his first coup and was imprisoned, everybody was acting like he was this victim and that he wasn't supposed to be locked up because he was the rightful leader anyways. That like they're in a nation that has like liberal tendencies and like believes in democracy, yet they don't, yes, when it comes down to it, they don't actually care about democracy. They just want to use the aura of democracy or the aura of liberalism in order to continue having like good optics while they continue moving the movement further forward. Like I've been a Republican my entire life and like a conservative my whole life. I'm not this like, yeah, as I said, I'm not this like fucking leftist or communist or socialist that like hates all of these people or thinks that like George Bush was a fucking fascist or anything. Like I'm not, that's not me. But yeah, when it comes to Trump, I kind of left that movement once this is the direction it started heading in, because I feel like I do hold these principles pretty stringently.
Did you not vote for him in 2016? I'm just curious when you veer off. So who was the last Republican president you voted for, if you don't mind me asking?
So I wasn't actually able to vote. I'm a convicted felon, so this is actually the first election that I'm going to be able to vote in. But yeah, when I was younger, I committed a lot of crimes and got in a lot of trouble. Yeah. When I was
Okay.
18. I'm 35 now, so it's like 17
Right.
years ago. But yeah,
Right. Okay. Interesting.
but
Would
yeah, like
if you could have voted in, those elections, would you have voted for, McCain and Romney?
yeah, and I still like people like Romney. I always forget his name. I don't know why, but the old governor of Jersey, he ran recently.
Chris Christie?
Yeah, Chris Christie. Yes, like I like a lot of like the more, I guess, neocon, old school Republicans that I grew up with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any, Vanessa, do you have any comment on the overall conversation of Trump being a fascist or not?
Um, Not really. I mean, I can understand, I guess Sitch's position and a little bit of Tom's, but just Sitch's position on. He does have quite a bit of fascistic. I don't think I can pronounce that correctly. Fascistic, rhetoric. So I almost can't really blame the media for setting up that having that position because he makes it easy for them sometimes, honestly. Although I don't believe that he is fascistic at all. I just think that he does relish in that rhetoric for whatever he feels like it benefits him for. I'm not sure if it's intentional or accidental. I'm sure both sides can make the argument other way, but that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where I have that my position, and I just don't feel like that even whether it is intentional or accidental. I don't think the rhetoric is to the point of where I would be concerned because I do trust into the systems that we have in America for checks and balances. So I don't think he'd be able to, if he were to get to that point, and if he was reelected, that he would actually be able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think after
Right.
the Supreme Court made the broad immunity ruling, I'm a little bit more afraid of whether or not that's becoming more and more of a possibility. But even if I didn't have a long list of like 20, 30 examples of things that he's done throughout his presidency that or things that he said that I would consider to be just more and more evidence that he is a fascist, I would believe the just large amounts of people who have worked closely with him and hear everything he says when he's not on camera and when he's not in front of the public, and they know how he works and the things that he wants when he's not, yes, like putting on an act. I would believe all of those people that are coming out consistently saying that yes, he just does say racist stuff. He is a fascist. That he does have a bunch of authoritarian tendencies. That
I'm
yeah, over time I
sure
would
I could
believe
find,
all of them.
pretty sure I could find a group of people who can say who used to know you, used to have had a relationship with you, who probably wouldn't have the best things to say about you, depending on how the relationship between you and them dissolved, right?
Sure. Yeah, of
They don't
course.
have an incentive to sort of put the most negative perspective of their relationship with Trump out at all.
Of
I
course, but we don't seem to have that as like a pattern with everybody who's ever run for office or
Not
held
everyone's as
presidency.
divisive as he is, though. And
Sorry?
I would think that not everyone is as divisive as he is. It would not everyone would benefit of
Sure.
having that position with any other politician. Actually, a lot of them would get demonized, especially if they're on the left. It would just get their entire career or personal life would completely be annihilated if they came out against someone who was fairly popular, like Obama, or I guess even Kamala at this point.
Yeah,
People
maybe.
they get okay.
I mean, it's hard for me to ever really know like how divisive somebody is because even comparing to Trump, like I remember growing up a Republican and everybody, yeah, so in Georgia hated Obama. Like he was the fucking devil. He was the
Oh,
antichrist. He was the worst fucking person of all time.
and my whole life too. I definitely remember everyone hating Obama, especially being black. They did not hold them back on telling me exactly how they felt about him. So
Yeah, so like I when I think of
I
like
don't.
how divisive somebody is, it's hard for me to like really gauge it in comparison to the types of rhetoric that was used
Oh,
against
I
Obama and Hillary and all these other people on the right when now all of the divisive or all of the people who feel like Trump is super divisive and super problematic are on the left and everybody on the right thinks he's just misunderstood and it's the mainstream media that's lying about him all the
like
time.
in their relationships and getting a divorce and having like huge family blowouts over Trump versus over Obama. And believe me, I being one person who have lost a lot of friends because of my political alignment, which the people who were already in my lives already were aware of until it got to the point where it was Trump versus anyone else. So I think that the division when it comes to Trump is quite more palatable and significant versus like with Obama or any other someone else you brought up, I forgot, or with Hillary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, it's just I was gonna say I was gonna agree, but then I almost thought it might go to both our points. Is that even the large amounts of like Republicans apparently, Kamala said that she had like a list of 200 Republican officials who are all endorsing her over Donald Trump, and so yeah, I don't know which one that goes to, if it is just that he actually is really divisive, or if it's that he just actually is that much of a problem. I don't know.
Okay, let me read some super chats that are questions related to the conversation. Afro-Fi Cook for $10 says, per Italian fascist expert James Greger, in his book Mussolini's Intellectuals, the actual definition of fascism is, quote, national syndicalism with the philosophy of actualism. Okay, I don't know if that helps us, but
Isn't
I mean,
national
I guess I know it's,
syndicalism? Isn't that like isn't that generally an autocracy? I'm actually not super aware of
syndicalism
syndicalism.
is a movement for transferring the ownership and control of the means of production and distribution to workers' unions.
Oh, okay.
And then I guess national syndicalism is integrating that into a nationalistic structure run by the government, which is what the fascists were trying to do from an economic perspective, because they had this idea that all enterprise, all business should be, that the country is a body, and that all businesses should be operating towards the well-being of the body of the country. So I don't know what
But the
actualism is, though.
so yeah, okay. So then that, by that definition, Hitler's not a fascist, which I know that that's like a, for the people who are more like trying to go with a strict Mussolini sort of ideology, Hitler is not a fascist. So fair enough.
Well, I know that like when people talk about it, they usually say not, like the way I've heard it is that Italian fascism was kind of fascism in theory, and Nazism was fascism in practice.
I heard
So
Hmm.
I don't know enough about like the economic structure of Hitler to know if he was sort of manifesting the national syndicalism exactly, or what was
Well, I
going on
mean,
there.
didn't they just say that it's the philosophy actualized? So it would have to be put into.
If it's the economic principle, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would argue that I think you can have, and this is true with, I think this is the way that I conceptualize fascism, is that the main component of fascism is not the economics of it, is that it's the cultural aspect of it, and everything is supposed to support the cultural aspect of that. And the economic structure of the country is just whatever they can manifest, whatever economic structure that they manifest that they feel will allow this sort of cultural idea of fascism or Nazism to flourish in the country. Anyway,
Okay.
let's see. Afro Cook for $10 says these vague definitions are so indistinct that they can apply from anything from ML communists, banana republics, absolute monarchies, and more. Fascism just means bad to these people. Well, I think it means, the way that people are using it against Trump, it just means authoritarian and racist. That's really what it means.
Well,
I think
again,
when most people
I
have the
want to be clear.
conversation.
I had a lot more in there than
You did.
authoritarianism and
Yeah.
racism, but
Right.
I like it. It's why I did kind of start off by saying, like, I know a lot of people use the word like fascism to just be like bad, and there's a
Right.
reason why I've never called somebody a fascist before, is because yes, I don't use it to just say like they're a bad right winger or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I didn't mean to say that you were saying that. I just meant in terms of generally when I hear people say it like in the media or something. I think that's what they mean. So,
Mhm.
Cameraman52 for $5 says, does tomfoolery consider Trump's revolutionary and advocate? Wait, does tomfoolery consider Trump revolutionary and advocates a cooperative economy, both being important identifiers of fascism?
I would say that he's probably a revolutionary of sorts, but I don't know. I'll have to think about it. But I mean, I do agree with you, and like Adam, that it seems like he is taking like a business mentality and just applying it to government. It's just that, yeah, generally we would call that authoritarianism, because in a business, yes, you have a CEO or a boss, and they just kind of dictate what it is that you're supposed to do. And when I ran companies, I would say, yes, I am a dictator, and you just do what I say. That's the end of it. This is not a democracy. But yeah, in our governments, those are generally bad things.
Caleb the Sacrificer says, if fascism is selected democratically, is fascism a good thing or a bad thing? And if it's a bad thing, does that mean democracy bad? Populism paradox. I mean, I would say that fascism is bad, regardless of whether people vote for it or not. So
Yeah, we that's why we have the Constitution that's supposed to kind of like exist regardless of whether or not we vote in a fascist or an
Right,
authoritarian.
right.
That like, yeah, it's those rights are supposed to be there either way.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Milma for $5 says, can Tom lay out his full definition of fascism without being argued at each point? So his definition is clear. I feel like it got lost.
Yeah, I have it written down so I can make sure I read it correctly. So this isn't, yeah, this is pretty like close to what it is that any dictionary will give you. I just kind of put it into more like smaller words as much as I could, but yeah, it's a nationalistic and autocratic movement led by a strongman or machismo type of populist with a need for conformity, united under a single leader.
Okay. Messi Tenet for $5 says the Democrats are acting like fascists. They arrest their political opponents and threaten former Trump staff with arrest if they don't turn on him. What's your response to that?
I mean, I've gone through the cases in Georgia, and they seem to be very convincing. There's a lot of evidence there. Yes, they have 4 lawyers now of Trump's who have pled guilty to taking part in the in trying to overturn the election, and are now also testifying against Donald Trump. So, as far as I can see, there's nothing that about this that is like fascistic in any way. Even Rudy Giuliani, when he kept claiming that he had tons of evidence of election fraud, then got to the point where he was supposed to present the election fraud and then said, yeah, I lied, so what? I have freedom of speech, and then got sued by the people that he was accusing of election fraud. So I think, yeah, once the people like are admitting that they're running around lying about this sort of stuff, and I don't know what else you have left at that point. What, like, how is it fascistic anymore once they've already admitted and pled guilty to these things?
Drew the Diamond for $2 says Tom is a leftist. He believes in equity. Is this true?
No, not at all. I've said before. Who said that? Was it
Drew the Dogman says?
Okay, I was about to say it was probably Drew. So I was talking to Drew about the fact that, like, I think liberalism believes in equity to get to equality of opportunity, and that like we have things like like everybody should have like free or public schools for the first 13 years so that they at least have the ability to like understand what it is they're voting for, and then can have the opportunity to go to college afterwards. But that we wouldn't consider like somebody who's 18 and just like got out of slavery to have this equal opportunity with somebody who spent their whole life going to school and learning all the subjects. Those two people, liberalism would not look at those two people and say they have equal opportunity. And so liberalism does believe in some equity to get to equal opportunity.
Okay, I had to think about that one for a while. Offsee for $5 says, would Joe Biden putting in unconstitutional vaccine mandates be authoritarian? I would say no, but I assume Sitch and Tom would have to say yes. So I would say that it's definitely, if Joe Biden is putting in some sort of unconstitutional or unlawful vaccine mandate. Well, I'd say, here's how I would say it. If he tries to put in some vaccine mandate and something stops him, right? Like the Congress stops him, or the courts stop him and say, you can't do this. And then he tries to do it anyway. Then I'd say, okay, well, that's definitely an authoritarian tendency for that specific action. And then if you see a pattern of that behavior where Joe Biden just, continually has something that he wants, and Congress and the courts tell him no, and he still tries to shove it in anyway through any means necessary, then I say, yes, he's authoritarian at that point.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that. I think that, yeah, part of what was missing with a lot of the conversation was like the tendencies that continue on over and over to create a pattern of behavior. That is when eventually we call somebody authoritarian, not just one action, but we can call an action an authoritarian like action. I think that lots of leftists said that Donald Trump was like authoritarian when he closed off all the borders during the pandemic. Whereas, like, obviously, generally, we wouldn't think it's okay to close off all the borders, and generally, that would be kind of an authoritarian move. But during a state of emergency, you have a lot more room and a lot more freedom to do authoritarian like things because in those times, it calls for something more drastic from our leaders to just kind of impose stricter rules on us. But once those are gone, yeah, if we don't get rid of those rules, then yes, again, then it would be considered authoritarian. But because we actually had a state of emergency with the pandemic, I don't think anybody should have been calling Trump's border stuff authoritarian in any way.
Malcolm McKee for 5 Canadians says, Sitch, if Trump doesn't respect laws in an authoritarian manner, why didn't he quash George Floyd riots in different states? Why defer that to state governments? So I don't remember. I mean, I don't know the specifics for each riot specifically, so I can't comment on that. I do know that a lot of times when Donald Trump would want to do something, his inclination, this is at least what's reported, obviously now, things are reported. People who work for Trump make these, say these things, so you can decide whether you want to believe them or not. But the continual story that I would hear, both in reporting and from people who work specifically with Trump, was that Trump would want to do something, and essentially the people who he would tell to do it would say, no, we're not going to do that. Or they would like his staff would either try to convince him that he can't do that because it would look too bad, or the people who he wanted to do it would literally say, and this is what happened with the electors, with the trying to get the Justice Department to send out the note to say that they found election fraud, which was a lie because they hadn't, was that they said, if you make us do this, we're all just going to quit, essentially, and you're going to be presiding over a graveyard instead of a government. So my argument would be, if Trump's inclination is to just do all these things, do these, strong arm authoritarian things, and he has to be convinced or cajoled or even coerced by everyone around him not to do them, then that's the system working. That's preventing him from doing the authoritarian thing, but he still has these authoritarian tendencies. That's his inclination, is to do those actions.
Yeah, he said that he was going to send the National Guard to a bunch of different states to stop the rioting. Even I think some of the states didn't even really have rioting. And generally, the Insurrection Act, I think it's a 1807, says that they have to get permission from the governor in order to send in the National Guard. And so in this case, he didn't really seem to have a whole lot of authority in doing so. The Constitution does grant him like the ability to send them in if he wants to, but I feel like it's only if they're violating like some sort of federal law, or even like the government in that state is taking part in an insurrection, and none of those things were happening when it came to that.
Point was that if Trump is authoritarian, he should have just done it anyway without respect to those laws.
Right. So I was going to say he wanted to send them in. That he had to be convinced out of it. And so what he did instead is he sent them to those states, but to protect federal buildings, and had them stand around and guard the federal buildings instead, which was as close as he could get to what it was that he wanted to do. And lots of people believed it was some sort of intimidation act as well, to say that like, we're already here, so if you fuck around, like we're gonna spread out quickly. Who knows? But
do you agree with the action of sending the National Guard to protect federal buildings during
if
like
they
Washington in those places?
If they were in danger and they weren't being protected, 100%. I don't really remember that part of it. So if they were, then yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do remember watching videos of like Antifa people surrounding some federal courthouse and throwing rocks and I think some Molotov cocktails and trying to light it on fire. So I think that was totally justified. I mean, I think the governor should have accepted the state troopers to come and quell some of these riots, but they didn't. So
yeah, I don't remember it all very much.
okay. Kevin Walter for $20. Thank you. Says the way Tom tries to claim he isn't a leftist and has never called anyone a fascist before, and then basically vomits up every single nonsense talking point is insane to me. Stop trying to gaslight people.
What? Who else have I called a fascist? Like everything that you just brought up didn't actually say that I've ever called anybody else a fascist, and all of the points that I brought up don't apply to anybody else that I know of. So I don't know if you want to, like, when I say I haven't called anybody else a fascist, I mean like an American government. Obviously, I've called like Mussolini or Hitler fascist, but I mean like actual people in my lifetime. I don't think I've ever called any of these people fascists, and I've been up and down over and over on whether or not I ever thought Trump was a fascist, and never really felt like I had the ability to defend it as much. But I think that now, like, yeah, there is just an overwhelming amount of evidence.
Charlie for 7 months says, is the executive branch questioning the legitimacy of another branch of government authoritarian?
No. Wait, the legitimacy of it?
Yeah.
What I think so. I feel like you should be able to question it, but if you're questioning it in order to get rid of it, I would say yes. If you're just questioning like what types of authorities they should have, maybe not. Not sure.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on the specific, how that it manifests specifically. Because like, yeah, if a president is like questioning the legitimacy of Congress or the courts to even exist, then that is authoritarian. If they're just saying, well, I think I have the power to do X, and it's my purview, not Congress's, and then the courts adjudicate that matter, I don't think that necessarily in the vacuum would be authoritarian. So I say we'd have to know the specifics, I think. Chad Summer for 10 euros says, Matt Tahibi talks constantly about the mainstream media's disregard for free speech and their industrial censorship complex, and how normal editorial standards should not be applied to Trump. Disgusting. Huh.
Isn't Matt Tahibi the guy who did the Twitter files?
He did, yeah.
Yeah, I lost all respect for that guy in that.
And then he kind of, I forget, what did he do? Elon sort of like kicked him off the project. Didn't he say something Elon didn't like?
Yeah, I think that he was critical of Elon in a couple of areas, and Elon took him off. Yeah.
Kingslayer Damocles for $5 says, I feel like I could argue Biden is fascist using tomfoolery's definition.
Well, I do an open call-in show. You're welcome to do so.
Okay. Kevin Walter for $5 says, sorry, but if you think Trump called all immigrants rapists and murderers, you're either ignorant or dishonest. Straight up, no other options. Did anyone, was that come up in the stream? I don't remember.
Can you read that again?
If you think Trump called all immigrants rapists and murderers, you're either ignorant or dishonest.
I believe I have the quote right here.
Was that a claim you made? Because I was kind of like doing other stuff for part of the conversation. So
yes, it is. It is a claim that I made, and I said that they tend to deny it a lot. Let's see.
Okay. Well.
Oh man, I lost. If governors, no, this is the one about the National Guard. Yeah, go ahead.
Thaw for $20. Thank you, Thaw. Says, this is how bad your TDS is, Sitch. Tom said 89% of Republicans overall, and you said yes for backing
80.
January 6th overturning the election. 39% of Republicans were against it. Well, send me that. First of all, I haven't seen that poll, number one. So send that to me, because that's kind of interesting. But number two, what were they against? Were they against like the violence on January 6th? Because that's not what I was responding to. I was responding to the hypothetical if Trump had succeeded not through violence, but through the electors scheme, got Pence to throw out the electors, the votes, and Congress voted Trump president and the Supreme Court upheld it, I think 89% of Republican voters would be totally fine with that. I said 80. I think 80% of Republican voters would be in favor of that.
Okay, yeah.
I wasn't making a reference to the violence on January 6th at all.
Yeah, you said that. Yeah, that's what you said, and you said 80%, and then I agreed with you and said, well, that's about the amount of people who agreed with or who thought that the election was stolen, or yeah, who thought the election was stolen. I think they said that
Right.
it was like 80% of Republicans in the polls that I saw, and so,
Right.
so yeah, that was, you said it, and I agreed with you. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I don't know if that was the poll question that you're talking about, though. I'd be kind of surprised because I don't think even I think only 15% maybe of Republican voters even have a good understanding of the electors scheme in the first place. So I don't even know how that question could be polled effectively or correctly. So okay, here, you sent me the link. Republican loyalty to Trump rioters climbs in 3 years after January 6th attack. It's from the Washington Post. 3 years after January 6th attack, Republicans are more sympathetic to those who stormed the U.S. Capitol and more likely to absolve Donald Trump. According to the Washington Post University of Maryland poll, Republicans are showing increased loyalty to the former president as he campaigns for re-election and fighting criminal charges over his attempt to stay in power after losing in 2020. They are now less likely to believe that January 6 participants were mostly violent and less likely to believe Trump bears responsibility for the attack. Okay, where are the numbers here? Over a third of Americans believe Biden's election was illegitimate, despite odds in multiple states, national televised congressional hearings, blah, blah, blah. When the Post UMD asked this question, says 69% of Americans say he was legitimately elected. Wait, hold on. Okay, the question was, regardless of whom you support in 2020, do you think Joe Biden's election as president was legitimate or not? Overall, 69%, or sorry, 62%, down from 69%. 62% say they thought it was legitimate. Only 31% of Republicans said it was legitimate. 66% of independents say it was legitimate. And 91% of Democrats say it was legitimate. Let's see. Most Americans, but few Republicans think January 6th threatened democracy. Which comes closer to your point of view? The storming of the United States Capitol on January 6th was an attack on democracy that should never be forgotten, or too much is being made of the storming of the Capitol. 55% say never forgotten. 24% of Republicans say never forgotten. 53% of independents say never forgotten. 86% of Democrats say never forgotten. Only 17% of Trump voters say never forgotten. So that kind of all makes sense. Let's see. Do you think the protesters who entered the Capitol were peaceful, mostly violent? Narrow majority says Trump's action on January 6th threatened democracy. Okay. Okay, so they said overall it says 58% thought that the protesters entering the Capitol threatened democracy. 53% said senators and members of Congress voting against certifying the election threatened democracy. 51% said Trump telling his supporters to march on the Capitol where Congress was certifying the election was a threat to democracy. Interesting. Okay. That's interesting poll stuff. Let's see. Does it ask the specific question that I was thinking of? No. Okay. It was an interesting poll, but thanks for sharing. Okay. Mr. Middleman for $5 says, if my employer screws me out of a bonus at the end of the year, if I believe I deserve to get paid, does stealing the money make me a thief? Yes, it does. You have to adjudicate it through the legal process. You can't take the law into your own hands. So, like, if you believe, and this is why I say when people resist arrest, if the police arrest you and you think you've done nothing wrong, you have to fight it through the legal process. You don't get to go extrajudicial and just start beating up cops and stuff. So. Artemis Fowl for $10 says, so like when Joe Biden tried to shove rent moratoriums against the ruling from SCOTUS, who stated it was unconstitutional, or maybe the student loan forgiveness schemes that have been shot down. I don't know specifics of the rent moratoriums, but yeah, you can all say that those are authoritarian. I think you could say that those are authoritarian personality types manifesting at that moment. And if there's a continual pattern of it, sure, I think it'd be fair to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that either, but we said earlier that yes, just because somebody tries to do something or writes an executive order and that gets overturned by the Supreme Court, I didn't use any of the examples. There's tons and tons of things that Trump wrote that got overturned by the Supreme Court that I didn't use as an example is because, yes, I would never say somebody just writing an executive order that gets overturned because it's considered unconstitutional would now be like an example of authoritarianism. But if they are counseled over and over saying that's an authoritarian thing, that's against the Constitution, and they do it anyways, and then it gets overturned, and then they try finding another way to do the same exact thing over and over, then yeah, I would say at that point it's probably authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
But it's yes, it would be an example of authoritarianism. But again, we're not going to take like one example of an action and then say this person's an authoritarian now. We would say that that's like an example of an authoritarian tendency. We could probably find that with most people and most politicians, an example of something. It's just that, yeah, again, like with Trump, we're going to have probably hundreds at this point. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like I don't have a list. I don't know if it's hundreds, but I also think where it manifests to is important as well, because even if I disagree with Biden trying to go against the courts for some policy like student loan forgiveness or something, and you could say, okay, that's sort of authoritarian, which I would agree with. I would say I'd definitely rate that significantly less than like trying to overturn the election.
yeah.
Right. Trying to stop the normal peaceful transition of power, trying to throw out half the country's votes. So it's not just a question of how many times it manifests, but also where exactly it manifests is going to affect the scoring. So I would score that like, 100 times more than trying to pass student loan forgiveness or something.
Mm-hmm.
Kid Truck 91 for $5 says, good to set up definitional boundaries between patriotism, nationalism, and jingoism. Yes, that's important. AKA Batosai for $5 says, can we get an example of Trump thinking he's above the law if he went along with the court's decisions and didn't use the military to try to overthrow? So I think there's this kind of issue, and I understand why people kind of go on this when we're talking about authoritarianism, because that's sort of the way our minds go. I guess the question I'd have to ask you, Batosai, and anyone that's sort of in that, who's like asking that question is, do you think if Donald Trump believed that the military would support him in, forcing himself to be president, declaring him president, do you think Donald Trump would have done that? Or do you think he'd have said, no, even though I believe that the military will support me in basically overthrowing, or basically declaring myself president, I'm not going to do that. Do you think Trump would have done it or not?
We already know that like the intelligence leaders did not support Donald Trump, and the generals and everybody, they were obviously against Trump throughout his entire presidency. And so it was fairly obvious that, yes, if he tried to give some sort of command for the military to back him, it's got to go through them, and it's just not going to amount to anything.
Right. No, but but what I'm saying is, like, so people say if Trump is authoritarian or has these authoritarian tendencies, why didn't he try to use the military to do this on January 6th? And my response to that is he knew that the military did not support him in that regard at all. Mm-hmm. So that's why it wasn't attempted. I believe if he thought
if he could have, that he would have
him, he would have done it.
Right.
And my reasoning for this is that, I mean, this was a big contention, and part of why Bill Barr left was that Trump was trying to get the military to forcibly collect voting machines in states, to sort of just use the strong arm there to take the voting machines and take them back to wherever to investigate.
We voted
against the law to investigate them whether there had been fraud claims or not. And Bill Barr kept saying you can't do this, and I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that there were military generals and officials that were also saying, we're not going to support this. You 100% cannot do this. This is an unlawful order. So I don't believe that Trump thought the military would back him in any sort of action like that. Obviously, this is a complete hypothetical. We'll never know. But I personally believe if Trump thought the military backed him, he would have taken some kind of military action on January 6th to sort of make sure that he would have been, president again.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I was just more so speaking to the point that we know that the military didn't back him. So you can't come back and say, no, the military did back him and he still didn't do it. So yeah, I'm more so giving like evidence that the military didn't back him. And if you believe Bob Woodward in his books, Mark Milley was apparently working against him in like the entire last 3 to 4 months of his presidency, trying to make sure that he didn't do anything drastic, and was like already organizing to make sure that Trump couldn't do anything like that. So, yeah.
Kingslayer Democles for $2 says Biden sent the DOJ and ATF against FFL holders. What does that mean? Federal firearm? What do you mean? I don't know what that means.
Is it federal firearm license holders?
For what? For licenseers? What was the context of doing
Federal
that?
firearm listings from the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco.
I don't know what the specifics of that is. Artemis Fowl for $10 says, thanks for proving my point that one side can do exactly the type of things you say is fascistic, and because the conclusion is inconvenient, you can make special pleading arguments. Well, I think I don't think you really listened to what I said, Artemis, or you were kind of blinded by your own biases, because I specifically said that I would agree that those actions could definitely be labeled as authoritarian. But unless you're going to make the argument, which you could, I think it'd be an absurd argument, Artemis, and I don't think it's a real argument. I think it'd be a fake argument. But if you want to make the argument that Biden trying to go around the courts to find a way to push through student loan forgiveness is the same as trying to overturn the election, then I guess that would be your argument, which to me is completely ridiculous. So that'd be a fallacy of not understanding that things exist in different degrees. Brian for $5 says, I'm late to stream. Is the argument Trump is a fascist? And if so, what's the difference between fascism and authoritarianism? We talked about that earlier, Brian, so I don't know if we want to repeat the whole thing again. But Oshacy for $5 says, Sitch, do you think if Democrats had control of Congress during Russiagate claims, they would have impeached and removed Trump? Because I sure do. Yeah, I think that's probably very possible. I think that is probably very possible. I don't know I think if they would have done that without waiting for any sort of investigation to prove any of those claims, if they did it just based on the accusations, I do think that would be pretty insanely ridiculous and unethical and immoral. So,
yeah, I would assume that they're asking after the Mueller report came out. I think that they had like maybe some reasons to do it. It wasn't really enough, but they had reason enough to do it for at least like through a democratic sort of mindset where the Mueller report came up with like him getting in the way of his own investigations and kind of impeding their inquiries into Trump's staff, and Sessions lying and things like that happening over and over. Trump, calling the head of the FBI in a couple of times to like ask him questions about his own investigation and try to tell him how to run an investigation into himself was something that I think a lot of people considered to be highly unethical. But with just that as an example, I wouldn't be supportive of them trying to impeach over that, but yeah, they felt like that was enough to make an attempt, but they didn't do it.
K.A. Batosai Fratano says, what would be Trump's goal in using the military to stop a bad election and redo a legit one, or just make himself a victor outside of any other system? I mean, in the hypothetical, I would imagine it would be to declare himself.
Is it authoritarian to steal a primary
president.
from
I don't
voters?
think it'd be to redo an election. I don't think that's possible in any way, because each state kind of runs the elections separately. So, anyways, do you want to say anything, Vanessa? Any conclusion to all this?
It was an interesting conversation, and I enjoyed having, only part of the conversation with with Tom and Adam. I'm not sure where he went, and with you, Sitch, of course. But it was great. It was nice meeting you, Tom. So yeah, that's about it. And I do want to like stick on just for like a little bit, so don't kick me off yet, just because Sammy just informed me that she sent me a very important super chat, and I would love to answer it whenever you get to it. So that's it.
Okay. Okay. And Tom, thanks for coming on, having a conversation. Where can people see you?
Yeah, I'm Tomfoolery Show on YouTube. I also stream on Kick. Most of my stuff is like going over articles and like studies, looking into stuff, kind of coming to positions, and then once I have like a stated position that I believe in, then I'll have people call in and kind of test me on it or give me more information to where maybe I can change my mind and come to new conclusions. And yeah, just kind of over and over testing the bounds of what it is that I believe and what it is that the audience believes. And so we do open call-in shows pretty much every night. If you want to call in, we use phone lines, Discord, StreamYard, all that stuff. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on, Tom. I'm gonna read the rest of the super chats that are just like random ones that aren't necessarily related to the conversation. So,
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. Have a good day.
all right, take care. Okay, may go.
That's frustrating. That is frustrating.
Let's talk about prepping for $5. Says blocking a punch is to the detriment of the guy who wants your lunch money because now he doesn't have your lunch money. I guess that's in terms of like the nationalism conversation. Dialogue always for $5 says note to self, send Adam a glossary before speaking to him. LOL. See, Hayden Dill for $5 says time for an Adam intervention. Dialogue always for $5 says if checking for consistency in a person's argument is bad faith, you're demanding the person to argue under a framework you can never be held to. Hayden Dill for $2 says it might be time to go full Destiny with this chat. I don't know what that means exactly, but okay.